Hi, my name is Pete Probst. I'm with Indigenous Energy, and I work on fuel quality projects with the Illinois Soybean Association. Today, we're going to sample some fuel tanks. Right now, we're at an above-ground storage tank, an AST. There's some things that are a little bit different between all different above-ground and underground storage tanks. Namely, this one is going to be outdoors a lot, obviously, and more subject to the elements. And so what that means is, as you have, as it heats up and then it cools down at night, basically, the fuel tank is breathing, and so any headspace that you have on top of the fuel is going to be allowed to potentially bring in moisture and other things from outside. So those are some things we want to check for. Most above ground storage tanks are going to have a dike around it. That's a fuel control spill measure to make sure that any kind of spilled fuel does not leak into the environment. You kind of want to take a look at the general condition of the tank. Is there any obvious water entry points? Those are things to take a look for. And right now we're going to look at different ways to get inside of the tank to actually sample the fuel. When the driver comes to deliver fuel, they drop it off to this connection here. They would hook a hose up to this, fuel the tank, and then in the event that there is a spill from the hose, that gets trapped in this spill bucket. And so one thing you can watch for, especially when it comes to fuel quality, is to make sure that you don't have fuel sitting around this spill bucket. Because if this bucket gets too full, what you're supposed to do is open this, and any fuel that's stored up here, which is also going to contain water and sludge and other contaminants, is going to go right into your fuel tank. So it's always a good idea to check for this and make sure that there's no fuel. Because this is a connection fitting that has an anti-overflow device on it, meaning that once you get the 90% capacity of this tank, the fuel flow cuts off, we will not be able to insert our sampler directly into here. So we're going to need to find another port. Every tank is designed a little bit differently. There's different ports depending on the user. This one, we're not going to be able to sample from the fill port, so we need to look at what other ports are available on this tank. These things here are blow-off lids. Essentially, if too much pressure gets in, these will blow off. These are not very easy to take apart. And because this is a double-walled storage tank, there's a layer on the outside of this, the exterior layer that's actually filled with some material. And so this may be tempting to look at in terms of taking this cap off, but this is really just for the fill material for the double-walled tank. So where we're going to go is right here. This is another port that will lead directly into the fuel tank. So we'll remove this cap here. First thing you want to do is take a look down there without dropping your flashlight, and then you should be able to see if there's fuel, the flashlight basically reflecting off the surface of the fuel and coming back, which I can see. So this is in fact a fuel port. So now we'll get our bottom sampler ready and take a sample. So because we're sampling this tank for microbes, we need to make sure that we don't introduce microbes from the outside into the fuel. That would give us a misrepresentative sample. So what we do is we first need to disinfect the bottom sampler. And we can do that by using 99% isopropyl alcohol. We just need to make sure that every surface gets coated and cleaned of any potential contaminants. Basically, you just want to make sure that there's no residual sludge or fuel or anything else from previous samples. This bottom sampling rod has a seal on one end. You need to make sure that this seal goes towards the bottom where the sample is going to be collected. Now it's ready for use. So basically you just lower down the sampler. You'll feel it hit the bottom. And then if you listen, you should also be able to hear some bubbles coming up. Basically the air inside of there is being displaced by the fuel, and you know that the bacon bomb is becoming full. And you bring it back up. By releasing this top pin, the rod releases the fuel back into the tank. It's good to flush anything out of there and make sure you get a clean sample. I like to flush it 3 times. After pulling the sample, you want to make sure all the fuel is cleaned off of the bottle, so you can write with a nice Sharpie marker the location, which tank, if you have multiple tanks per location, the date, and if possible, if there's multiple locations you can fill from, which fuel port you used to sample with. So after you've obtained your sample and labeled it, then it's ready for packaging. We're basically going to put it into 2 Ziploc bags, and then for this case, because we're testing for microbes, we're putting it into an insulated box that has ice packed around it to keep it cold in transit to the lab. After you're done, it's good to put a little bit of thread seal back on there. That way this doesn't rust up before you use it again. Clean up any spills that you may have had and move on to the next site.